From Quadland Associates.
Okay, thank you. Just for the record, you want to go state your name?
Sure. My name is Michael Strader. I'm an engineer at Whiteland Associates, the civil engineer of record for the conditional use permit application submitted for you tonight. And I'm here on behalf of the owner, Highway 12 Retreat LLC, to try to address any technical questions or concerns that the board may have, but also to address the couple of public comments.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. May I interrupt for a minute?
Go ahead.
I did get an email from somebody that was saying that the meeting has been cut off at 40 minutes. I don't know if there's anything we need to do. Anyway, we had gotten an email. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it looks like maybe we've been cut off.
Matt is here, and he said that it's dropped twice on YouTube, and that he keeps recreating it, and it should still be playing.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just saw that come across, and I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Don, is this one yours?
Yes, sir, it is.
Please start us off.
Okay, this is a conditional use permit and site plan for a cluster home development in Waves. It is zoned S1, and it is currently 2 parcels that will be combined for the cluster home development. You'll remember that we put in standards for cluster home developments back last year that are specific to use for year-round occupancy. It's a little bit of a hybrid group development with the year-round occupancy being the reason for the flexibility and the standards. They are set forth in section 2231.1 of the Dare County zoning ordinance. That section establishes a limitation of 1,200 square feet for any structure included in that. There is an existing house on the property that exceeds that 1,200 square feet by a slight margin. It's 1,330 square feet. And in discussing the size limit with Mr. Strader, he and I both agreed that tearing down that old structure, and it's a fairly old structure, but it's a functioning structure, for compliance with the ordinance seemed a little bit excessive. And so I am recommending that the appropriate compromise for that be that we include conditions in the draft CUP that structure cannot be modified to be enlarged, or it can't be added on, that it has to stay as it is, and that if it's damaged, that it has to be built back in compliance with the 1,200 square feet. So the board needs to indicate whether that is okay or not. All of the clusters houses need to be separated by 15 feet. That measurement needs to be shown on the revised site plan. There is an just existing gravel driveway that widens which will be widened to 20 feet and improved with gravel. The section 2231.1 states that cluster home developments that cannot be properly served by emergency or service vehicles from an existing street must have a 30-foot right-of-way with paved improvements installed. The layout of the driveway seems to meet the intent of the ordinance. We have received comments from the fire marshal, and he is indicating that the gravel drive has to support 75,000 square feet. Those comments have been shared with the project engineer. And I think he had some other comments that they have to address before construction begins on the home there. So that needs to be included in the conditional use permit, that the comments from the fire marshal need to be satisfied. The wetlands on the site have been flagged and verified. The verification from the Corps is pending. We did, at the time I was writing my staff memo, we had an email, a public comment from Mr. Patrick Munson, who is requesting a buffer of some type. He is the property owner to the south, and so the planning board needs to discuss the requirement for a visual buffer. The ordinance requires a visual buffer between commercial and residential uses. Since this is a conditional use permit, I think that the requirement of a buffer in response to the request from the adjoining property owner is specific, and we'll let Mr. Strader address the property owner's agreement with that. We need to discuss the timetable for improvements and how they will occur. You know, once you get a building permit, you have to submit an as-built. And so, you know, are we going to do that collectively or are we going to do that individually? And that's just more a matter of record keeping and paperwork for us at the staff level. The most important thing that I've stressed to Mr. Strader that needs to be stressed to the property owner is that these are for year-round occupancy, and that has been written into the CUP, and that he needs to understand that and acknowledge that, and that's how it needs to operate. I've included a time frame for construction of 24 months. If that's not long enough, then now is the time for us to be advised of that so we can adjust the CUP. You will note on the site plan that there is that unusually shaped parcel that's to the north. The site plan indicates that the applicant is the owner. The Dare County tax records indicates that it's unknown owner conflicts. And so we can approve a site plan with that conflict, but we want to make sure that the lot coverage calculations are still compliant if that area of that lot has been included in them, so that if that conflict is ever resolved and it doesn't work out in the favor of the applicant, that we don't create any nonconformities if that area has to be removed from the lot coverage. Page 3, note 15 should be clarified. The stormwater improvements cannot be relocated or removed without prior approval, but does not indicate the approval agency, and that's just a minor thing. I think it needs to be indicate approval from the state of North Carolina and their county. I suggest that we indicate on the plat that all new structures shall conform with the Dare County Flood Damage Prevention Ordinance, including the local elevation standard of 8 feet. There is a draft CUP that I've attached. The public comments have been forwarded to Mr. Strader. The comments that we received today are regarding a cemetery that is on an adjoining piece of property. There is a site plan or an aerial that I put a copy of at your desk there. You'll see where Mr. Strader has outlined that in red. And it is 56 feet from the subject property that will be developed. It is not on the property that the site plan is being considered on. It is on the adjoining property. And I think that's all that needs to be said about the cemetery. If the cemetery was on the property that we were considering, then I think that access easements to it would be appropriate. But since it is not on the property that we are considering for development, that it is what it is. And I'm going to stop right there and let Mr. Strader address any concerns that the board may have or any questions.
Something that jumped out at me was 5 inches of gravel. Is that acceptable?
I would say that we usually require a sub-base to the NCDOT standards, which is 8 feet, and that 8 inches, and that's what we need to stick with. That's consistent. And I think that's probably what we required for Mr. Gutman's cluster home development. And so, you know, Mr. Kovac's putting that in there, or if that's what it's proposed, that may be what it's proposed, but I think it needs to be 8 inches because that's what we've used before, and that works. So let's stick with it.
So the detail that's included on the site plan sheet, the site detail sheet actually indicates 5 inches of sub-base and 5 inches of the ABC. So it's actually a 10.
Nope,
inch.
very good.
It's actually a 10 inch.
Even better.
section.
Okay, thank you. Any board members, comments, questions of applicant or staff?
I'd like to go and get started with the vegetated buffer request. Do you have any opposition to that? Like a Russian olive type of hedge?
Personally, I don't have an opposition to a vegetative buffer. So we're jumping straight to the southern adjoiner public comment.
Yeah.
There's a few things that I just want to make sure that the board is clear of. There, in my read of the comment, It may be that the southern adjoiner has had at least an occurrence, don't know how frequent, but there's been an occurrence of, let's say, trespassing to get access to a sound front amenity. So it sounds like it may be something that is already occurring. I will say, so there's obviously a concern that proposed development on the subject parcel may exasperate that concern. So I believe what Donna has written into the draft CP are some conditions that basically state that the folks that move into these proposed homes are made well aware and clear that there are no off-site sound front amenities that are available to them from any adjoining parcel or any parcel for that matter. But I'll add to that by saying there are some physical barriers that we're going to have with our proposed site development plan. I don't know how much you've seen of the grading and drainage plan and some of the other components, but in order to meet the state stormwater storage requirements, we are proposing infiltration swales and basins that pretty much line the perimeter of the site and specifically along the southern adjoiner. But all of this is within our subject parcel. So not only do you have a depressed infiltration swale, but there's also a berm, a physical elevated berm before it connects back to that southern property line. So in essence, there is a physical barrier along that whole front. Now, to speak to vegetation, that berm that I just referred to, it's graded at proper slopes and it has a top width of 1 foot. Now, if it were a wider berm, perhaps, but the state, with our Dimmler permit, DMLR, our state stormwater permit, the state frowns upon any woody vegetation along an embankment, this included. So I don't know that we'll be able to agree with the state's authority to actually incorporate trees or shrubs along that berm.
Well, given that this is a residential development, it's not commercial, I don't really see a need for a buffer. Am I missing something?
No, I was just wondering if it was something that would have been easy for them to do and they were agreeable to, then it becomes a non-issue.
Anybody else see a need for a buffer on this, vegetative buffer? Okay. I made a list of all of the things that Donna mentioned in her staff comments. Those are things that I think we can address in a motion. But just going back to the site plan, is there anything, any concerns anybody has with this? Anything we're missing? Suggestions?
I just want to make clear for the record, there is nothing in the site plan that interferes with the cemetery that is in that area, correct?
There is nothing on the site plan that interferes with the cemetery. The cemetery is located on the adjacent property. The plat of record for the adjacent property clearly depicts the cemetery back behind the existing commercial structure on that property. There is no access easement of record that I found described in the deed for the NC12 LLC property that's under consideration tonight. There's no access easement on the plat that I looked at. And so access to that cemetery should be occurring from the commercial property where that cemetery is located. It's my understanding that access to the cemetery has occurred from this property that's under consideration tonight, but that's just as a matter of convenience, if you will. And so I don't think it's incumbent upon this property owner to provide access to that cemetery. I think that's incumbent upon the owner of the adjoining property where the cemetery is located. I may be
Yeah,
wrong. I may be wrong about that, but I don't think so.
No, I just wanted to clarify that for the record, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And if I may, I can add a little bit further to that, just for the record. I believe that the recorded plat in Plat Cabinet G, slide 161, actually pretty nicely illustrates that that existing cemetery is relatively centrally located on the northern, off of the subject property, centered on the northern adjoining property on parcel 2, and speaks to that.
Yeah, Donna provided us with a copy of that. Yeah, I don't think the cemetery is an issue in reviewing this project.
Thank you. I just wanted to get that on record because we had that feedback.
Is 24 months long enough?
I nor the owner applicant have any issue with that, because the intent is to acquire all the permits, which are actually in process now. Once all those permits are obtained, he would submit back to you, and it's either going to go all at once, or it has to be done in an economic fashion, because that's what the whole intent of the ordinance was, or in sets and groupings. It will not be a long, drawn-out process of one. So that timeframe would work just fine.
And he understands that he has to have a North Carolina licensed contractor to pull those building permits.
Yes.
Then on the CUP, we need to reference the comments from the fire marshal.
Right.
And that seems to be addressed in the road cross section that's on the site plan, but we'll address the fire marshal's comments in the CUP.
Well, number 4 says the road shall be constructed to support 75,000 pounds as indicated by the Dare County Fire Marshal. And then it goes on to say that the road improvements once installed. Okay, at least maybe I forgot to put this in there, but that they would need to be certified before the as-built was submitted by Mr. Strader, that they had been installed as constructed. But Steve's going to go down there and inspect it beforehand. But I think the language in number 4 is adequate to address the comments from the fire marshal.
Okay.
Except for the fact about the water flow and the fire hydrant. You guys are,
Yeah, and just for the record, Mr. Kovacs reviewed the project. We had actually incorporated a number of things, because looking at the available fire flow of the structures compared to the needed fire flow of the structures compared to the available fire flow, we proposed a hydrant at the agreed upon location, designed the road accordingly. So it went through some iterations before it was formally submitted with this package. So, well, it's my understanding that we had addressed all of the fire marshal comments.
so are we installing a fire hydrant then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we need to put that as a condition, because I want it to be very clear that the developer has to put in a fire hydrant, because I don't want there to be any trying to slip off the hook on that one, okay?
And it's all shown on the conditional use site.
So we'll add a condition that says fire hydrant to be installed as per Dare County Fire Marshal.
You can make that number 5 since we're not doing the buffering.
Yes, very good.
Any other comments or questions from planning board members or staff? Well, if someone were inclined to make a motion to recommend approval, It would include a note on the site plan that the road maintenance will be the responsibility of the HOA. The site plan should include measurements of all structures. We're going to allow 24 months for securing the building permits, and that clock starts upon receipt of the wetlands verification. Is that correct?
I think it's from the Board of Commissioner approval is usually how I put that language in there.
Okay.
Let me read it. From the date of Board of Commissioners approval. Mhm.
Okay. 24 hours for securing building permits, starting from the date that the
24 months.
24
Yeah.
months, starting at the time that this proposal is approved by the Board of Commissioners. The site plan is to be corrected to note the ownership of the parcel to the north. That's the one that is in dispute. Note on the site plan indicating that the structures are to be occupied on a long-term basis. On page 3, note 15, revising that note to indicate that approval is required from the state and from Dare County before any stormwater improvements can be relocated, removed, and I'm going to add another word in there, or modified. Is that modified? Is that acceptable?
Could you repeat that again?
On page 3, note 15, we revised the note to indicate that approval is required from the state and from Dare County before any stormwater improvements can be relocated, removed, or modified.
Agreed.
Does that word modified cause any problems?